In many ways, the centerpiece of the progressive argument is the idea of relativism, which is something they had learned from studying in Europe and they brought into America, which is that there are no permanent principles. The idea of self-evident truth does not make sense. Everything changes, everything evolves. And they needed that principle, and they believed in that principle because that was the core thing that went against the founding in the first place, which was the idea of permanent principles. So then, what were the core progressive principles? Or perhaps I should say the anti-principles, because their principles were directed to undermine the core principles of the American founding. It's really built around four things that I'll mention briefly that really inform modern liberalism. The first is there is no permanent truth. Everything is merely relative. Everything evolves and changes over time. And this shapes their understanding of rights. The American founders had a sense of fundamental rights, the core things that never change: our life, our liberty, our religious freedom, our property. But for the progressives, all rights evolve and grow, which is why today we got any right you can possibly imagine, massive confusion about what is and is not a right. Everything changes. Secondly, they invented this idea of what they called the administrative state, which is rather than the limited government of the founders, rather than constitutional government, they really required and wanted a government which could do anything, everything, that was really by definition unlimited. If rights evolve and grow, so must government, because government had to secure those rights. Hence, government takes off and becomes unlimited over time. The third thing the progressives talk a lot about is what they call national community. Rather than local groups, decentralization, federalism, civil society, they thought everything had to be focused on the national government, the national community, and everything should move towards this notion of the nation, the centralized nation, built around government. And lastly, the concept we're most familiar with, they argued for what they called a living constitution. They couldn't get rid of the Constitution itself, and they didn't, it's still there, but they wanted to reinterpret it, radically deconstruct it so that it becomes virtually whatever they want it to be. It means anything and everything. And of course, behind that, the key lever of that living constitution are the courts and judges. Whatever the judges say is in the Constitution. They've got the final say, they claim, to what this living constitution means. That really undermines the whole idea of limited constitutionalism, ignores the idea of principles behind that sense of constitutionalism, and really turns over our whole self-governing system to judges. And that's one of the key problems we have today. And this gave rise to what becomes the progressive movement that we then see playing out over the course of the 20th century. The progressive movement, the New Deal, the Great Society, and I would suggest we're right now in the fourth great wave of that movement. It keeps coming back. It's kind of like the plague, over and over and over again. But it's based on these core ideas that the progressives themselves developed.